You're listening to WPKN 89.5 FM in Bridgeport and streaming online at WPKN.org.
Reporting and supporting what matters. This is CT Examiner Weekly.
Erin Stewart was widely considered a top Republican challenger to face Governor Ned Lamont in the fall elections. Now she's facing state and federal criminal investigations. I'm reporter Luke Feeney with that story.
When Essex and Old Saybrook residents helped save a 1,000-acre woodland in 2015, few expected that state environmental officials plan to log large portions of the property. Is it a travesty or just good forest management? I'm reporter Charlotte Harvey with the story.
Midterm and final exams used to be a high school rite of passage, but in Stamford, many high school seniors will graduate this month without ever passing or even taking either exam. Is this a sign of things to come in Connecticut? I'm reporter Eric Obernauer with that story.
From a swashbuckling pirate adventure to a paddle on the Mystic River, I'm Robin Breeding with a look at some events to get you out and about.
Those are the stories and perspectives we'll be sharing in this week's edition of CT Examiner Weekly. I'm Editor-in-Chief Gregory Stroud. Joining us today in the studio is Associate Editor Liana Tiexiera. Welcome, everyone, to the roundtable. First, we've got a big story here, and that's Erin Stewart. It's made national news, and it's sort of we're actually at the moment though. We're having a little trouble reporting this one.
Yeah, it's been tricky. It's kind of interesting because I remember, Greg, when you and I first connected and talked about me joining the CT Examiner, Erin Stewart was one of the first people you brought up, saying that we have a governor's race coming up and we're going to want to keep an eye on her. And I never expected that would involve reporting on state and federal investigations.
You said that New Britain, Connecticut was a national story, and we needed you to cover it. It wasn't just that it was the mayor of New Britain. So a Republican mayor of a heavily Democratic city was running for governor. And so the city is a story, the mayor is a story, the race is a story. And what's the status of that race?
So as for the actual race, the current nominee is State Senator Ryan Fazio from Greenwich. Stewart's campaign flamed out about a month ago. In the lead up to the Republican primary, maybe 2 days before, the city released a damning report from the Crombie Law Group, who was hired at the beginning of the year to, according to the report, conduct a comprehensive operational review aimed at identifying actionable opportunities to improve efficiency and strengthen the city's long-term fiscal sustainability.
So what the heck does that mean?
Basically, they were looking at the past city spending and seeing what was being spent, what wasn't being spent. And it turned out that there was a lot of improprieties with how Erin Stewart managed city funds during her term.
So we have a longtime Republican incumbent in a Democratic city. 12 years Erin Stewart ran this city. She decides to not run again and to run for governor. A Democrat takes that seat, and the first thing he does, Bobby Sanchez, is he launches an audit. And in some ways you say, well, that's a political act, but what did that audit yield?
A lot of damning allegations and evidence. It was reported that before leaving office, Erin Stewart tried to claim over $200,000 for 240 unused days, 78 unused personal days, and 126 unused holidays, as well as 192 unused sick days.
So the Attorney General, William Tong, has announced that he's investigating a specific fund that Erin Stewart had access to. Do you know what the fund is and what its purpose was?
The charity itself is the Mayor's Trophy Charitable Fund. It's a donor-advised fund managed by the Community Foundation of New Britain.
So, I mean, what we're seeing here is an investigation launched by the person who came after her in office. And that investigation has yielded pay dirt, I guess, if you will. I mean, everything from public dollars going to fund Erin Stewart's master's degree to a party perhaps for her children. Is it Peppa the Pig?
Yeah. One of the more, I think, explosive parts of the report, or maybe not explosive is the right word, but a part of the report that definitely got a lot of attention were that there were many Facebook posts that seemed to feature Erin Stewart wearing or using things she bought with taxpayer funds.
So I guess one of my questions is, if the taxpayers are paying for this investigation, and there's clearly some political angle to it, is this itself a bad use of taxpayer dollars?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I think at face value, it seems to me that clearly Erin Stewart did something wrong. I think that's a very safe assumption to make. It's important to note that there have been no criminal or civil charges filed against her, but at least based on what the report shows, it seems like a lot of money was misspent. I think it's important that the public knows that. That being said, I'm a little cynical on the timing of it all, considering, the first major report dropped 2 days before the Republican convention, and it basically iced her out of the race.
Actually, that was the second report. The first report was just as she announced her running mate. The second was just as she was about to go to as the Republican convention was starting. So it's one of those cases where we're sort of looking at and we're saying there's definite wrongdoing. The audit definitely needed to happen. Maybe I'm questioning sometimes who should have paid for the audit, or how it was timed. And so it's just like digging around, I think, as we've tried to do a little bit, find out the scope of the audit, find out how much money the city wants to claw back and how they should go about it, just to make sure everything's on the up and up.
I think this also brings up a bigger issue, not just of Erin Stewart's alleged conduct, but also the investigation opens up questions about what the city was doing in all of this and what guardrails they had in place that allowed this to happen or for it to go unnoticed.
And Greg started this segment saying that reporting on this story at this point has been a little tricky, and that's been part of the problem, because I've reached out to the city and I've asked, and as of recording, I still haven't heard back. We've also FOIA'd the city for the contract between them and Crombie Law Group, which is the group that's done this report. Still waiting to hear back.
So one of our questions is, we have an audit once she left office. So what about all the previous audits? And what about all those previous auditors? Did they do their job?
Yeah, and even in the report itself, they reference to the fact that in a 2019 audit, the auditor said that it seemed like the city did not have good internal controls on these P cards, and that they should be more checks and balances to make sure misspending isn't happening.
And just to be clear, the P cards are the employee; those are the public employee credit cards.
Yes.
Luke, one thing that strikes me about all this is, we're hearing allegations of possibly hundreds of thousands of dollars misappropriated, misspent, who knows? But sometimes it's the little things actually that speak the loudest. I can remember, and just indulge me, previously reporting in New Jersey, a school superintendent who filed a reimbursement for a $3 cookie that he bought at a highway rest stop, and that drove people crazy. With Erin Stewart, seeing that she's putting in for all these sick and personal days and other things, like she's just a regular employee, I have to wonder about that. When you run for public office, the idea is you're a public servant, and yes, there's a salary, but have you heard any feedback about that?
In the report itself, there's a pretty damning quote from her where, I referenced the hundreds of thousands of dollars she requested in sick days and stuff. She said, "Don't you think I'm owed this?"
So one thing this has done, though, is this story is sparking a lot of hard looks in other towns. And it's sort of wondering how this could have gone unnoticed. If it did go unnoticed in New Britain, what about in Ansonia? Or in Wilton, or in your town? And I think that's something that we're looking at. And I think certainly a lot of local residents in a lot of towns are filing freedom of information requests for these kinds of documents to see if it uncovers this kind of information. We've had previous reporting in Fairfield, the town of Fairfield, where there was a bit of loose use of those P cards, of those employee credit cards, and that money had to be paid back, I know. So, Luke, what's next in this story?
Well, she's, as I said earlier, while no charges have been filed, she's currently under investigation at the federal and state level. So we will see what comes of those investigations. She was recently subpoenaed by the city was recently subpoenaed by the federal government for records relating to her P cards purchases and stuff like that.
So we're going to have to wrap this one up, but I know we're going to be back to this one more times than we might like, and in other towns. But there's something else afoot, and that's in Old Saybrook in Essex, where we have a sort of beloved 1,000-acre, what they call the preserve. What's happening there, Charlotte?
So it is the largest intact coastal forest that's left between New York and Boston, and it was purchased in 2015 in part with funds from Old Saybrook, Essex, and the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection to preserve the forest. But now there's been a forest management plan that's been put forward that includes a lot of tree cutting, and people are really upset about it.
So you preserve a forest, and public and state dollars and maybe even some federal dollars went into this. And now the question is, what does it mean to preserve a forest? And can you preserve a forest without cutting trees?
And when I talked to the main forester who's been in charge of making this plan, Alexander Amendola, he basically said that the goal of the tree cutting is to manage the forest and to preserve the forest, having to do with the species of trees within the forest and all of the species that live there and depend upon these natural disturbance cycles that no longer happen.
So in your intro, you said they're looking to log large portions of the property. Could you quantify that? What percentage of the property? How many trees are we actually talking about that could potentially be cut?
So 60% of the property is actually set aside as a core protected area where no logging will take place. But 198 acres at the very least is being considered for timber harvesting. So not just the cutting down of trees, but the harvesting of timber to sell. And that in itself is concerning people and making people wonder, is this plan really about preserving the forest or is it about something else?
I think it's a really interesting issue because it happens all over the place. I've seen it happen on Nantucket. We've seen it here in Old Lyme. These big swaths get cut down and you're sort of left as a person who walked there saying, wow, what happened here? But you have to understand, I think you have to look at these projects through the long view. It can't be the moment. You're looking at invasive species that will take over everything. So it's a long game here they're playing.
So that is one of the things I was told. The plan is set out for a 10-year period, but it mentions tree cutting cycles that are as far out as 120 years. So this is not just a temporary thing.
Are we talking about clear cutting portions of this acreage, or more or less not spot cutting, but just more or less pruning back, if you will, overgrowth of trees that are considered superfluous and so forth?
So the complicated answer is yes and no. The forest is split up into 24 different areas that each have its own plan. Some areas call for what people, I think, would consider clear cutting, where it's removing large portions of the stand. But others only suggest it and say to consider it.
I think, Charlotte, you and I, before you wrote your latest story, we walked the property. As I say, the first thing you do is let's actually go there. Let's see what the reality is on the ground. And we saw a lot of ridge. We saw a lot of oak. We saw a lot of laurel. We saw a lot of dying beech trees. One thing I think I noticed when I look at a forest, I saw these oak trees, which they don't compete that well for light. And part of the way you can tell when a tree has a lot of competition is they grow up very, very tall with very few side branches. So they're sort of fighting for that light. And I think part of the discussion was, how do we open up the canopy?
Yeah, one of the goals of any kind of tree cutting is to open up the canopy. And it's really to encourage a diversity of species to flourish, ones that require more light than is being currently provided to them with the current tree covering.
And part of the reason that we might not have all the diversity we like is these forests were pretty much, what were they 100 years ago?
They were fields. They were agriculture fields.
So these were agricultural fields. So all the trees that grew up pretty much grew up at about the same time when they let these farm fields go fallow. So the trees, most of the trees we see are what, 60, 80 years old, about the same age. And so some of this is about a diversity of ages, right?
Yeah. Some of the cutting is considered uneven age cutting, where it's intentionally done to try to leave trees of different ages and at different stages of development.
Charlotte, is there anything that residents are doing or can do at this point? Or is it written in stone that now for the next 125 years or so, this is the plan for the area? Or are there meetings that are going to be held? What's the plan?
So the plan as of right now is that a final report is going to be submitted in the coming months. Amendola told me that it would be in around 6 months or so, and it will go before the committee that is in charge of making final decisions in Old Saybrook, and that there has to be a public comment and approval from the committee. Right now, it's just a plan. It's been signed off on, the version that's currently before them, but it's not formalized right now.
Connecticut has moved from being a farm state to an industrial state to now really a suburban state. And how it manages the regrowth of that forest is going to be something that I think a lot of people distrust the government's role in this. And so, and some of this, what we're seeing is, can these foresters, can they actually win the trust of the public? And so far,
they have not. On its face, cutting down trees seems really antithetical to preserving a forest, and that is what people are thinking.
We're going to have to cut this one short, but I think we should look at it more, because part of, I think, this issue we have of quality of life, some of the quality of life in Connecticut deals with its woods and forest and its nature and our access to nature. And but the other thing that people come to Connecticut for, besides forests, they come for the education, they come for the schools. Certainly that in Stamford, I'd say that Stamford, more than many towns, is driven by people that maybe leave the city and say, I want to raise my children in Connecticut schools. And so what's happening in Connecticut schools? What's your story? What's your take, Eric? Is Connecticut leading the way in something new about education?
Well, we don't know. It may be. You know, the interest. I'll say first, I was very surprised when I first learned last fall, or heard it said that that Connecticut high schools no longer required midterm and final exams for all students. Now, to be fair, school officials point out that assessment is still done in other ways. I mean, that there's an ongoing discussion and really argument about that. The interesting thing with education in general is that things seem to be very cyclical. I mean, we went through a phase, I guess, from the late 90s up until recently, where the mantra was accountability. And I just wonder now if we're seeing, began with COVID, the push to reduce testing is maybe a reaction to that.
So what we're seeing, and certainly in the early 2000s, this No Child Left Behind, something that came from the George W. Bush administration, was this idea of sort of federal standards accountability. But then some of the question here we're hearing in Connecticut is, how many tests are enough tests? How much testing is too much testing? And some people in Connecticut are saying maybe we need a lot less. So what would be the benefits of not having a midterm exam, not having a final?
Well, one of the points that was made to me was that still a good number of students still take advanced placement courses. Those have basically a final exam, an AP exam, built into the course by its design. And students still do take an SAT. Students still do take national standardized tests. But the argument is that we can build assessment into the curriculum in other ways, and that just all this testing takes days of learning and instruction away, and we want to put some of that back.
So in our latest reporting, though, that was spurred by teachers coming to us asking questions.
Yes, and you know what's very interesting, and I somebody who I spoke to suggested that perhaps we have just an unspoken conspiracy, if you will. I'm using that term tongue in cheek, of people who just like not having tests because it's less work for the teachers and for the administrators. Parents don't, without final exams, some can start their summer vacations early, last week of school. But that was, from the teachers that I spoke to, I was surprised. That was not the case at all. They said they feel we really need to have some form of end of year assessment, and that, yes, it's more work for us, but it's important.
If there's no end of the year assessment, what are the teachers and students doing in Stamford schools in the last weeks of June?
Well, again, but the school district says that, look, we still have assessment built into the curriculum in other ways. We have block scheduling now, which means longer class periods, so teachers can still do in-class assessment.
So Eric, just to put a point on this one. So students use laptops. It's part of the learning and teaching today in classrooms, like it or don't like it. More time in front of a screen. So I was hearing that the laptops they were collected, a week ago or longer.
That's true, and that even grades were even final, for the most part, have already been finalized. And the school district's argument is that we have to compute class ranks and so forth for students who are graduating, and that even in years past, it takes time to inventory all the laptops and so forth, and that there's still learning that continues to go on. That's not necessarily the feedback I'm hearing from people on the ground, though.
So, Eric, I think this is a really interesting dynamic because I graduated high school about 6 years ago. I took midterms and finals, and I hated them. I hated them a lot. I found them to be incredibly anxiety producing. And I always felt like my final grade was never reflective of my final grade on my final exam, never really reflected how much I learned in the class. Have you heard from students or teachers who have similar concerns about that?
Well, let me say first, I don't know of anyone who actually says, yes, I can't wait for I mean, even teachers, I mean, it's more work for them. But I think the argument, Luke, would be that in almost any profession, possibly ours being one of the exceptions, you often have to take some sort of exam, or even if you're going to one of the skilled trades, electrician, even cosmetologist, culinary, plumber. So, and without that experience, are students being deserved?
Yeah, I can't really understand how the assessment works. Would it be on written evaluation of material during the semester? I'm also a person who really was not a test person, but I also understand that if we don't have some kind of system in place, then that seems very subjective of how a teacher who doesn't like you could just be like, you fail.
I want to circle back to the uniqueness of this situation because Stamford, it seems like, it's the only, if not one of the very few in the state that still did not reinstate finals or midterm exams after COVID. And it's been 6 years. So why is Stamford taking this route, and why do you think other towns haven't done this?
Well, I can speak to Stamford as to why they haven't reinstituted midterm and final exams. And again, depending on who you talk to, of course, the school administration will say that this allows us more instructional time. We can build assessments into instruction.
But the reality, Eric, is that one of the next stories is this might not be an anomaly at all, that there's a state law And can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that gives us a sense of maybe what the next steps are, where this is going to go.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And again, that comes back to what I was, speaking about, the pendulum shift in education. This new state law, I forget the number, it was signed into law by the governor just about 2 weeks ago. It was one of those things that there wasn't a whole lot spoken about it. It calls for establishing incentives for schools to consider other forms of assessment other than midterms and finals. And it even calls for allowing the Commissioner of Education to seek a waiver from the federal government for certain accountability standards.
So one thing we're going to be looking at is how this new law plays out. And as it's sort of maybe Stamford has been a pilot. And I think we've looked at Middletown too for some of these assessments, some of these ideas, because one of the other parts of the law deals with how we teach math. Some of these ideas play out in an individual district, and maybe they will play out across the state. But this story is one that we will be following town by town and up in the Capitol for years to come, frankly. But I think we're going to have to cut it short at that. And there's more to Connecticut. There are a lot of events happening, and that's why we turn to our arts editor, Robin Breeding, for what we should be doing over the next few weeks.
Well, coming up on July 18th and 19th, there's a thing called Big Ink, and it's going to be a workshop at 5 Points in Torrington, Connecticut. And Big Ink is a group of people who travel all around the country, and they have people carve giant, like plywood size prints. And then they bring this press to each studio and have 2 days where they print all of these giant prints. It's very unusual to have this happen. The public can come and watch it. There'll already be people making the plates and have done that, but public can come watch them pull prints. And if you're a printmaker, it's an unusual experience. It happens only in a few places. All right, next up. So on July 18th and 19th, again, we have the annual Pirates Weekend with the Norwalk Seaport Association. And they take a big ship out to Sheffield Island with a bunch of kids in pirate outfits, and they go hunt for treasure with pirates. So they meet at 90 Water Street in South Norwalk.
And so how much does this cost?
It's $45. And I think kids would have a good time out there.
So what else should we be looking for?
Well, if you'd like to do anything on the water, in Mystic, there is their annual Float Swella. And this is music and paddling on the water. So anything without a motor, if you can sail down the river in a tin can, everybody's getting together at a dock, and then they're all just floating together down the Mystic River. So whatever you can get without a motor.
So you have a historic setting. You've got a beautiful, beautiful boatyard and a chance to get out on the water.
Yeah, they call it a pop-up paddle.
And so what else do you have for us?
On July 19th, the Henry Whitfield House in Guilford, which is an old, beautiful, historic house. Every year they have this group that comes out called Trades Up, and it's a nonprofit from Kent. And they do working with old historic tools and hand-eye coordination, sort of a STEM-based learning thing. So they're going to show kids and other people how to do hand carving, you could learn how to use a skill saw or, power tools. So it's a neat kind of hands-on, and it's for kids and adults. All right. Last up, I have coming up on July 25th at Bruce Museum. There's an opening of a show. The artist's name is Dustin Yellen, and he works with really peculiar he works with small glass studies and collages, and he puts things in between laminated glass and creates these sort of paintings that explore the unseen and seen impact of civilizations on the natural world. And they're like these vitrine-like structures that are translucent with light and objects, and they're very otherworldly. It looks like a great show.
With that, I guess we're going to have to wrap up this week's edition of CT Examiner Weekly. I know it's been great to have the staff all together. You've been, flung across the state, and this is a chance for us all to be in the studio, everyone here talking about their stories, looking at what's ahead. We'll be back next week with all the news and with a look at how these stories play out from Hartford to your town. I'm Greg Stroud. The news is never done.
For more news and events, or if you want to send in comments or story ideas, please go to ctexaminer.com. And if you want to support our mission of keeping Connecticut informed of the news that matters, a subscription is just $20 for the entire year. Reporting and supporting what matters. This has been CT Examiner Weekly. Thanks for listening.